Well, good morning. It's nice to be here. And I missed you all 2 weeks ago. I was having some surgery and happy to report everything came out well. And I'm doing fine. Thank you for your prayers and your good thoughts. So the other day, I saw a bumper sticker that really attracted my attention. I get a great many Dharma Talks from bumper stickers, by the way. That's why I always pay attention to them. This one said, "If you ain't outraged, you're not paying attention." And of course, today, we have lots of reasons to be outraged, it would seem. But I'm not focusing on what's happening around us, but I want to talk about the experience of rage and anger itself. In fact, the title of my talk today is Enlightened Rage, which may sound strange to some folks because enlightened people aren't supposed to get mad. Or so it would seem. So, first of all, I want to say I'm not implying that one should be outraged or one should be angry or one should feel anything in particular. First of all, what you should be feeling is what you are feeling, whatever that is. But what I do want to talk about is how when anger or rage being a more primal and intense form of anger, when that arises, to be able to work with it skillfully and to use it for some potential breakthroughs in terms of going beyond places we've been before. Many of us in our culture, and other cultures as well, don't allow ourselves to feel rage and anger. It's messy, it's impolite, it's not nice. And particularly in spiritual communities, where we're supposed to be serene and holy and happy and all of that. I put quotes around that, we're supposed to be. That's not what we're teaching, of course, but that's the overlay that we hear from our culture, that we see in our culture, whether it's a Christian church or a Buddhist temple or whatever it may be. There's this overlying tone that spirituality means peacefulness, serenity, and we never get upset over anything. And that's not true, because spirituality is about being real. It's not about being any particular way, but it's about being who we really are in each moment. So there's that conditioning that spirituality means holiness, serenity, never getting upset. And we also have a great deal of conditioning from our family, from our culture, from our peers, from our past, about anger and rage not being okay. Or if it is okay, oftentimes it's used in a very unskillful way. It's used to control and manipulate people. Many of us were harmed by anger, unskillful acts of anger. And we may have learned to equate anger with violence, with pain, with threats, with bullying or intimidation. That is unskillful. The anger, the rage itself is not unskillful. That's simply an energy, a very powerful energy, very primal energy moving through our body-mind system. When we focus rage outward, when we put rage in control of someone else, we say, they are making me angry, it's all about them, then we're not looking at ourselves and we're not taking the opportunity to awaken. In fact, it puts us asleep even further. It really convinces us that our story of ain't it awful and aren't they awful to be more and more true every time we repeat it. So, I want to say that rage, anger, and violence, bullying, and intimidation are not the same thing at all. Rage, as I use the term, is simply an experience in the body and in the mind. It's a feeling. Now, some also, I've heard people say, well, what good does it do to get angry? Well, the implication there is that anger and rage is only valid if it can change somebody else. That it's used in a way to convince somebody or coerce somebody into doing something different. And if you can't do that, then just stuff your rage. The point is, whatever we're feeling, it's important to feel it fully. And the more intense and more primal that feeling, the greater the opportunity for an opening. And it's also more frightening to us, too, sometimes. Because rage means we're out of control. The ego doesn't like to be out of control. The experience of rage is not a choice. It's either here or it's not here. But often we don't recognize it. Again, one reason we don't recognize it is that we get lost in the story that it's about someone else. Look at what they did. Now, what they did may be outrageous, it may be unethical, it may be illegal, it may be harmful. I'm not denying that, but the point is, if that's all we focus on, then we're cheating ourselves out of the opportunity for growth, transformation, and awakening and liberation. Because being in an imperfect world, there's always going to be something we can be angry about if we're looking outwardly. Always something. The mind says if it wasn't for that person or that group, then I'd never be angry again. I'd be happy and serene and I'd be enlightened. But we know that's not true. We get rid of one dictator and another one follows in his footsteps or her footsteps. Whatever that dictator may be. We may be married to that dictator. It's not always a political dictator. Or we may work for that dictator. So being aware of when anger arises and not being too quick to try to overcome it. Now, certainly not to act it out. Again, if that's all we can do is act it out, then we're better off repressing it. Because we definitely don't want to use it to manipulate or harm other people. But ideally, we neither repress it nor act it out. That's really what we're looking at here. Not acting it out, not acting it in, but just being with that experience. And again, it's an experience that's raw, it's powerful, and it's out of control, so it can be very scary for some of us. Another point I want to make is that rage is the natural response to being denied a basic human need. Rage is a natural response to being denied a basic human need. Newborn infants will experience rage. Animals will experience rage. It's part of our life energy, part of our survival system. That when we don't get a primal need met, particularly if it's in a chronic way over time, rage and anger is going to build up, saying, no, this is not okay. And unexpressed rage creates all sorts of problems. It leads to self-hatred. It can lead to depression. It can lead to despair, shame, physical and mental illness. So it's a very powerful emotion, and when it doesn't go out, and when it's not expressed consciously, recognized consciously, when it's pushed in, it's like a poison. And everything I mentioned, self-hatred, depression, despair, is endemic in our culture today. We're seeing it everywhere. When I talk with people, when I listen to people, I hear either anger or depression. I hear a lot of despair, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. And again, I'm not saying this is about something. Certainly it is about something, but that's only the trigger, the experiences within ourselves. Someone else can trigger our rage, but the rage has to be there in the first place. Otherwise, there would be nothing to trigger. See? Now, I want to address something very basic in a Buddhist crowd like this, because we are often led to believe that rage is a cause of suffering, anger is a poison, greed, hatred, delusion. Shouldn't we try to get over anger, hatred, etc., ASAP, soon as possible? What I want to point out that is that rage is not the same as aggression. Anger is not the same as aggression or hostility. Hatred, hostility, aversion, pushing away, acting out an experience. It's saying, I refuse to have this experience. That's what aversion is. It's a refusal to have a particular experience. And that refusal can show up by either repressing it or acting it out, rather than simply being present to it. Rage is not about acting out. Inherently, it's not about acting out, and it's not about repressing it. It's about experiencing it, just like we did with the breath a few minutes ago. So the experience of rage is something we feel in the body, we notice in the mind, their thoughts, their emotions, and their physical sensations connected with the experience of rage. By being aware of them without getting caught up in them, that's when rage gives us the power to be liberated, awake, and enlightened. So desire is not the same as craving. Rage is not the same as aversion. Okay? Aversion is pushing away. Rage is simply experiencing something. Aggression is directed towards someone or something. Aversion is pushing something away. So ironically, when we repress our rage, that's the aversion. The aversion isn't in the rage itself, it's in the repression of it. And oftentimes on long retreats, even short retreats, when we begin to open up, it's very, very common for rage to come out with individuals, because rage is something that's suppressed for so long. I was at a retreat outside of Boston a few years back, and there was a woman sitting not far from me that she just wept and wailed and screamed pretty much the whole 10 days. And toward the end of the retreat, I was in a group with her, and I found out her story. And she was a Mexican national. She lived in Mexico City, and her brother was murdered several years ago, 5 years ago, she said. And she had worked through the grief and forgiveness process, she thought. So she thought she was, quote, done with that, over it. But what she realized was, even though she had done a whole lot of work around her brother's death, she did not let herself feel the rage and the anger. And that came out. So rage, anger is part of the grieving system as well, part of the grieving process. So anytime there's a lot of pain, there's going to be some rage, typically. So what is enlightened rage? Well, I need to go back a few years to a name you may or may not recognize, Abraham Maslow. It was very influential back in the 60s and 70s. He was known as the father of humanistic psychology and sometimes known as the grandfather of transpersonal psychology. He was very instrumental in the human potential movement. He was a key and seminal figure. And in one of his books, the key classic on a psychology of being, or toward a psychology of being, I guess it is, he declares some tenets of the humanistic approach. And this is familiar to most of us because of Abraham Maslow. That's why it's familiar, because it's become part of our culture, part of the green culture anyway. Principle number one is that we all have an essential nature, whether you call it the Buddha nature, the Christ nature, the true nature, whatever you call it, Atman, the self. It is intrinsic and unchangeable. In other words, it's not something we can add to or take away from. It's not something one has more of or less of. It is who and what we really are and always have been and always will be. Second premise is that if we permit this essential nature to guide our life, we will grow happy and healthy. So there's a very strong incentive to listen to and be in harmony with our true nature. Conversely, if the essential nature is suppressed or denied, we will get sick. And not just physically sick, but emotionally sick, relationally sick, spiritually sick, etc., etc. Dysfunctional, sick, unhappy, dukkha. Although he didn't use that word dukkha himself. And here's a couple of points that I think are really important. And that's this. He says health, or apparent health, lack of symptoms, does not necessarily mean, or health does not necessarily mean the absence of symptoms. Rage can be a healthy protest against the crushing of our true nature. I'll say that again. Rage can be a healthy protest against the crushing of our true nature. So anytime our essential nature is denied, rage is what we will feel, even though we're not aware of it, and much of the time we're not aware of it. Because once again, Rage is the result of not having a very basic need met. And the most basic of all needs that we have is to be in touch with our essential nature. That's our most fundamental need, is to connect with who we really are. And when that's interrupted, rage will result, as will grief. And that rage is part of the grieving process. There's a great deal of grief that we feel being separated from our essential nature. Symptoms can be a healthy protest against the crushing of our true nature. Conversely, sickness may be the absence of symptoms when they should be there, when they naturally would be there. So I sometimes used to tell my students, in the 1930s, if you were a well-adjusted Nazi, that didn't mean necessarily you were healthy. You see, you could be happy, you could be living what appears to be a satisfying, rich life, but that doesn't mean you're a healthy individual. In fact, the healthy individuals were the ones that were most unhappy, you see. When we're in a culture that crushes our essential nature, and we're fine with that, that itself is probably the greatest of all sicknesses. Many psychologists, particularly family systems therapists, know that when parents bring in the problem child to be fixed, okay, the problem child may very well be the healthiest member of the family, you see, because they are expressing the pain, the rage, or whatever the symptoms are that are unexpressed in the family system. Dr. Carl Jung, who died in 1960, I believe, was born in the 1875. So this is around the turn of the century, 1900. His first assignment as a resident psychiatrist was to go to this mental hospital and observe the psychiatrist, the patients, and to write a report. And the report that he wrote was that the psychiatrists were no less ill than the patients were. That the psychiatrist had a vested interest in keeping the patients ill. So there was really a dance, you see. So it's important to recognize that we need to look at our culture and our environment. Just because we're experiencing a symptom of unhappiness doesn't mean there's something wrong with us or that we need to, quote, adjust. Because many of us, including myself, were taught that the ultimate virtue is to be well adjusted, you know, to adjust to the world as it is, which I was never very good at, you see. And so I thought there was something wrong with me for many, many years. So rage, paradoxically, may be our antidote for suffering. Enlightened rage is simply saying, no, no, no. This is not who I am. This is not what I am. This is not supporting my true nature. No, and letting ourselves feel that rage. It's a very powerful practice, and it's not one you necessarily want to start out with if you've never meditated before. But if you're able to just notice even a little bit of irritation, I invite you to not be too quick to suppress it, but let yourself feel it. Let yourself hear the no that's in it. Ask yourself, what am I needing? What does my true nature need in this experience? And that's where rage can lead to enlightenment, and rage can then be transformed into some very powerful energies for transforming our lives and for transforming the world around us. So I think I'll stop there. And again, may you all be enlightened. And if it takes rage to enlighten you, so be it. So be it for all of us. Amen.